What if teaching humility, respect, and resilience to your child could be the key to helping them thrive in today's world? Well, Jill Garner is the author of Strongheart, Cultivating Humility, Respect, and Resiliency in Your Child, and she equips parents to raise children grounded in core values that build strength and integrity. Jill, welcome to the call.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today, Nancy.
I'm so excited to have you here because when I was reading your book, I was getting excited because you were talking about respect and resiliency, and not only that, about self-esteem. Why do you think humility, respect, and resilience matter so much for kids today?
Oh, goodness. Well, it doesn't take long to look around at our world today or flip on the television, to any of the standard channels, or get in the car and flip on the radio. Everywhere we go, children really, truly are growing up in a culture of lies, which is, I know it's a harsh thing to say, but unfortunately, I believe it's the truth. And the only hope that our children really have, this next generation coming up, to be able to navigate through that and to find their way, is if we're going to ground them in truth, in absolute truth, in God's word. And in order to do that, I believe those three qualities are the most important attributes we can instill in our children. As you said, humility, respect, and resiliency. When I was writing the book, I interviewed countless parents and and adults as well who you had not who had never had children. And I always ask the question, of those three attributes, which one is the most important? And by far, people said respect. That respect was the most important. And one very wise young woman said, "Oh, absolutely, it's humility." And I said, "Oh, I'm kind of delighted to hear that." I said, "Tell me why. Why did it strike you that way?" And she said, "Because without humility, there can be no respect."
Mhm.
And I thought, what incredible wisdom. And I couldn't agree with her more. Couldn't agree with her more. And to me, and I agreed with the sweet woman as well, humility, to me really is the grounding of all of it. Because I like to think of humility, as someone once said, it's not thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less, which
Mhm.
means you're thinking of others more. And it's
Mhm.
the ability to put the needs of others ahead of your wants. And when you are doing that and you are others centered and others focused, then you're going to be respectful, right? You're going to be respectful. You're not going to be thoughtless and disrespectful. You're going to be respectful. And through those, every action we have of giving respect, especially in the face of disrespect, when we choose to give respect, that builds our resilience, because with every instance of it, of giving respect, we gain respect for ourselves, which is what enables us to be resilient. And when we fall, we get back up and go again.
Mhm. I always think that the opposite of humility is actually pride, because pride is something that would hold a person back from being humble, right?
That's
And
true.
so,
That's true.
so I loved where you mentioned self-respect.
Yes.
And what's the difference between them two?
Nancy, without realizing it, I think you just gave me the perfect intro into that thought, because you said you think of pride as the opposite of humility. So if we believe that humility is, the most important quality that we can really cultivate, especially in our children, well, truly, um, what happened with self-esteem, let me explain that. What happened with self-esteem is, self-esteem is no different than the sin of pride that presented itself in the Garden of Eden. Same thing. In the 1700s, there was a lot of discussion about vainglory, vanity, glory of self. Same thing as sin of pride in the garden. The difference in those two perspectives versus today's self esteem is, we understood in those first two references, it was a really bad thing. There was no question that it was wrong, and it was in the mildest form distasteful, and in the roughest form, the greatest sin is the sin of pride. We're told in Scripture. And 60 in the 1960s. early 70s, that's when we were told by Carl Rogers, he's the one that gets credit, who is the grandfather of humanism, should have been a giant red flag. There's something wrong with this, but we all missed it. But he's really the one responsible for bringing the idea of self-esteem, which was coined in the 1890s, stayed in the clinical circles in the 1940s, and like I said, in the 60s. He said the chaos of the 60s happened because kids didn't feel good about themselves. And we need to go about feeling good about ourselves. That's what our kids need. And in that thinking, when it was introduced into the broader society in our country, and the United States is really the only country that really fell for this hook, line, and sinker. Rest of the world didn't fall for it like we did. But we were told that was going to cure all the problems and that everything was going to settle down. Kids were going to find respect for others again, rather than all the disrespectful behavior of the 60s. They were going to feel good about themselves. There wouldn't be, everything would be at peace. There wouldn't be violent episodes. Everybody would get along. And oh my goodness, none of those promises have held true. And as I truly believe, it's because the whole notion of self-esteem, just as the sin of pride, was given to us to destroy us, not to save us. And yet we have been obsessed with the building of self-esteem.
I agree with you 100% there because, yeah, I mean, we did grow up like that, didn't we?
Yes,
Self-esteem was a big word,
yes,
you know?
yeah.
So what is some of the common parenting trends that might actually hold kids back? What do you think about that?
Mhm. So I think of the mirror or the window is you probably read that is the kind of visual imagery that I give to explain it. And so if you think about in today's world, well, really for the last 50 or 60 years, we pick up a mirror, a self-esteem, and we put it in front of a kid's face. And of course, when we do that, the only thing the kid can see is themselves. They can't see the possibilities of who they can become. They can't see through the mirror of self-esteem. They only see themselves. And in that process, we have crowned our children as king or queen of the home.
Oh my gosh.
When that happens, what does that do with the role of the parents? That puts the parents as servants of the king or queen. Totally flips the God-given authority of structure of a home, completely flips it upside down. And we have little aristocrats, I call them. And
I love it.
who are the rulers of the home, and mom and dad are doing everything they can to please the child. And of course, that's where this whole happiness movement came from. For the last 50 years, when parental surveys have been conducted and the question has been asked, what do you most want for your child? The number one answer by far has been happiness. I want my child to be happy. And I just cringe when I hear that, because no, you really don't want your child to be happy. That's not your role as a parent. That should not be your goal as a parent, because if you're consumed with keeping your child happy, your child's not going to learn lessons, the lessons of life they need to learn through failure. They're not going to learn how to handle and deal and overcome disappointment. Therefore, they're not going to mature.
Mhm.
Therein explains this phenomenon of kids in their 20s. That was true 10 years ago in their 20s. Today, it is now kids in their, and I'm saying kids in their 30s, who, and they're still kids, who are still not able to find their purpose in life, and not their purpose, God's purpose for them, and who are not able to function as contributing members of society. And they're back home living in the basement and back home having someone take care of them because they never gained maturity. And all of it stems back to the notion of building their self-esteem.
Mhm.
And it has been, I don't know of any other philosophy, I'll call it, or theory of parenting that has been more damaging than the whole idea of self-esteem and all that goes with it.
So what do you think, we need to let go of as a parent?
Yes. So rather than that mirror of self-esteem, I'll show it that way. We need to raise our children at the window of self-respect. And so think about when I have a window next to my desk here. So think about when we look out a window, you catch a glimpse of yourself. There's a dim reflection when you look through a mirror, I mean through a window. So we take our children to the window of self-respect, they get a glimpse of themselves, but now rather than getting lost in themselves, which is what happens in the mirror, rather than get lost in themselves, they see immediately through themselves, beyond themselves. They can see through the window of self-respect. They can see the world. They can see that God has a plan and a purpose for their lives. They can find their contribution to give to others. Their circumstances now become, their future circumstances become now a reflection of who they're going to become and what they're going to give to the world, rather than in the mirror of self-esteem, it's all about what's the world going to do for me. It's all about me. And so, how do we really begin to do that? I think it was your question. And
Mm-hmm.
so, how do we build their self-respect? Well, the first way that we begin to do that is to get them outside themselves. So much of the counseling today, particularly non-Christian counseling, particularly, so much of that counseling only takes kids further and deeper down into themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no answers to be found. I mean, we know as Christians, we don't have the answers. The answers are, we don't find the answers in ourselves. We find the answers when we look up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we look in his word and we look into his face and bow before him. That's where we find our answers. We don't find them inside ourselves. And yet we keep pushing kids deeper and deeper into themselves. It breaks my heart. And most of us recognize as adults the issues today of anxiety, the issues of depression that's so prevalent among our teenagers and young adults today. The fastest way out of that is to get them outside themselves and to get them in service to others, get them to meet the needs of others. And that begins, in the family with our youngest children. I call it preventive parenting. There's a lot of those issues we can prevent and not even deal with if we
Mm-hmm.
start them from day one. For instance, say a 3 or 4 year old, and it's time for them to learn how to kind of begin to order their room. And
Mm-hmm.
if we're gonna teach them to keep their shoes in the bottom of the closet and the stuffed animals on the bottom shelf. But the impetus behind that, the reasoning behind it, isn't so their room won't be a mess. We're going to connect it to how it affects others. So, honey, we're going to keep our shoes on the bottom here, and we're going to keep our animals over here so that no one comes in and trips over them.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to pick up with a little bit older child. We're not going to leave the wet towels on the floor anymore. So the next person that comes in doesn't have to pick up your mess that you've left behind.
Mm-hmm.
And we begin to help them see truly beyond themselves. One other thing I'll throw out, and while we're thinking about that, is as the children grow, this is why chores are so critically important. In a survey a couple of years ago, 87% of today's parents were raised with chores. Only 28% of those parents are requiring their children to do chores.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's part of that self-esteem movement, right? I'm such a proponent of chores, maybe not for the reason most people think. My reason is because it gives your child an opportunity to contribute. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it gives them a sense of value and a sense of worth
Mm-hmm.
because there's something that they can do that contributes and does add value to the family.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than coming in and having someone serve them and someone take care of everything and someone pick up their plate, someone clean up after them, when they have chores and they have duties and responsibilities for the family, it makes them feel valuable and it gives them that sense of belonging, which
Mm-hmm.
is some of the biggest issues that kids are dealing with today. And we can solve those issues, and it's not as hard as people think,
Mm-hmm.
to solve those issues.
Well, I don't know about you, but my parents grew up in World War II, and
Hmm.
chores were definitely part of our lives, as you were saying, right? And we got paid for the chores that we did.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
because we needed the money.
Yeah.
Okay. But today in this world, kids just get handed everything.
Right.
So what you're saying is so important that a child knows that, that they can contribute, that they have a place and a part. A
Mhm.
lot of it too is I really feel like a lot of what kids go through in that self-respect, that, that whole matter of how they feel is communication between the parents and the child too. A
Mhm.
lot is there's so much disconnect because the parents are busy, like, either looking on their phone or they're not paying attention or, I mean, so many factors, and the kid feels like third, you
Uh-huh.
know,
It's true.
third in
They
order,
are.
and so, I don't know. I mean, what do you say about that? How can you speak into that?
Mhm. Um, a dear friend of mine several years ago called one day, and he said he was on our board actually, and he called and he said, "Okay, Jill, I got one for you." He said, "I lost it last night. I just lost it." Let's see, his kids were I guess that we had one in each, one elementary, one middle, and one high schooler. So that broad range of kids. And he said, I lost it last night. And I said, well, love covers a multitude of sins. It's going to be all right. He said, oh, I'm not apologizing for it. He said, I lost it last night. He said, I went and got a basket and I put the basket by the back door. And I said, when you walk in, the phone goes in the basket. And when you leave, the phone goes out and goes with you. And he had an epiphany because they had finished supper, and as soon as they finished supper, they all were sitting around, and he said he looked up, and all five of them, he, his wife, and their three children, they were all in the living room, and they were totally disconnected from each other because everybody in the house was on a device or it was on something. Some were on the phones, one was on the computer, but everybody in the house was on a device, and yet they were sitting all together in the living room and totally disconnected. And he said, I just lost it. And he said, and I said, what'd your kids say? And he said, oh, they didn't, they just put their phone in the basket. He said they understood dad had had enough, and
Yeah.
he's a wonderful, wonderful man. And he said, so just wanted to share that with you, and it was wonderful. It's wonderful. And he said, and of course, as time went on, they found how much they enjoyed it when
Mm.
they were willing to put him aside, And then, of course,
Mhm.
there were times, when of course they had to get back on for whatever reasons, but it became part of who they were as a family. It redefined them and brought them back to who they really were and who they had been before they got lost in their technology.
Mhm.
So that's one suggestion, wholeheartedly one suggestion. One of our we don't do technology at my house with our grandchildren, and two of our grandsons, a 10-year-old and 8-year-old, came over one day, and as soon as they walked in the back door, the 8-year-old said, "Oh, Gigi, can I get on your phone? And I've got this game I want to blah blah blah." And before I could say a word, Jack, his older brother, ran over and he put his hand on his shoulder and he said, "Austin, we don't do that at Gigi's. Get over it." And Austin's eyes, he went, "Okay." And he immediately opened the door, went out on the back porch, got the
Yeah.
baseball, got the glove, and said,
Yeah.
"Gigi, will you throw the ball?" I said, "I'm there, bud."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
went out and threw the baseball. But it's not as hard to break these things as people think that it is.
Yeah.
And of course, to me, the biggest key to all of this, getting us reconnected again, of course,
Mm.
it really does start with the parents. And you've
Mhm.
got to be willing. Something I always tell parents is something we can never be guilty of as a parent is expecting more of our children than we do of ourselves.
Mhm. Mhm.
And whatever we're going to expect of our children, we better model it ourselves. And we better expect the same or even greater,
Mhm.
of ourselves.
Mhm.
'Cause they will follow our lead. They
Yeah.
will. They'll follow our lead. Sometimes we just try to say one thing and do another. And that's not going to work.
That's not going to work. Well, one time I went to church and there was a mother there, and she was a single mom. She had two girls, and all three of them were sitting at a table at a gathering on their phones.
Mm,
I don't think I've ever seen that before, where
mhm.
they were just so, engaged in the phone and not with each other. And that's really rough. That's rough. But I do know that you have a story about a 13-year-old. Would you mind telling that one?
Yeah, this is a stinger. So I was helping. helping some parents with their 12-year-old daughter that started at 12. And she was beginning to get a bit disconnected, and some ideas and thoughts and things that were coming out of her mouth. They were like, where did this come from? And they were very concerned. And we talked about it. And, that age of 12 to 13 is that age of accountability. That's scripturally correct. And often I taught that sixth grade time frame for about 14 years. And I mean, I saw it happen every year. And that's that time of life when a child is trying to decide for themselves. Okay, I know what I believe, what I've said I believe. I know, sure know what my parents believe. I know what they think. But is this really who I'm going to be? Is this who I'm going to become? Because what's going to happen with them when they're 16 doesn't happen in 16. It happens way before that. And it really happens at that 12 to 13 age. That's who they're going to be in high school, is what they did, those decisions that are made at that point in time. And so you're going to feel that tension and that struggle. That's why middle school, nobody has good middle school stories. It's kind of the pit time of life. you know,
Mhm.
we're clumsy and, puberty, and we're trying to figure girl boy stuff, and, and faith. And it's just such a hard time of life.
Mhm.
And the pull away from parents to find their own identity. So anyway, and so we felt like that was what it was. But after a few months, it was very clear it was much more than that. And she was really closing her heart down and heading off in the wrong direction, totally away from everything that her parents thought they had instilled in her. And so we went to a Christian counselor, and they did a very interesting exercise, and they did an assessment with the parents on where they truly had spent their time. Did they spend their time in raising her in entertaining and entertainment, or did they spend their time in intentional training?
Mhm.
When all was said and done, the honest assessment was 90% of her upbringing had been spent in entertainment
Mhm.
and only 10% in training. So when she hit that critical 12 to 13-year mark in her life, she really didn't know what she believed. She really didn't know. And this poor child, um, while the parents felt, they did a lot of things together, and they went on vacations, and, they went and did, and they were always on the go, and they were together and all that. They thought they had, were doing a good thing. She didn't even have life skills. She didn't, she couldn't cook anything. She didn't know how to clean and scrub and just general life skills, even, which doesn't happen when you're entertaining your children. That's
Mhm.
not where they learn. They learn from intentional time set aside in training. And it was such an eye-opening experience for the parents. The good news is it wasn't too late. And of course, it is never too late to make a turnaround. And they did an about face. And I usually tell parents just go cold turkey. There's no easing into any of this. It's just, okay, you know
Mhm.
what? We have recognized we've done some things wrong, and we're going to make things right. And it's
Mhm.
not going to be easy for a bit, but together, we're going to stick this through. And together as a family, we're going to make some changes. And you're going to help me, and I'm going to help you. And we're going to remind, and together, we're going to get through this. And when it's all said and done, we're all going to find so much more contentment. Our home is going to be a better place, and we're all going to feel better. And then, you know, begin those changes. But they did, and brought her back around. And but that is so critically important, because we live in a child-centered world. We live in a culture of lies, one of which
Mhm.
is that children are supposed to be the center of the universe. No, the Lord God is the center of the universe, not children. And
Mhm.
yet, that's what we've done in this, I almost say grotesque world of entertainment, and you know what I
Mhm.
mean, the 7-year-old birthday parties, that are just, it's
Yes.
not cake and ice cream and two friends over to spend the night. It's, 50 friends, at a club with, you know, woo, it's just so out of control. But anyway, that entertainment, we need to train, not entertain.
That's very true. And there are so many parents out there that really need to be hearing this. If you had one piece of advice for raising strong, respectful kids, what would it be?
This is going to sound very Southern, and I'm sure your audience recognizes that I'm a pretty good, authentic Southerner, and I do have that drawl, and that's Mississippi drawl that you hear. But I've been in Louisiana many years now. But um, one of the most simple and yet overlooked and actually neglected and even refused to use techniques, we'll call it, is to instill yes, sir, and no, sir. um, from the time children are very young. I lived in New York City for 2 years, flat in the middle of Manhattan, when my twin sons were 4 years old, and they were doing beautifully with yes, sir, and no, ma'am, and yes, and all of that. I was so proud of them. And we hit New York City, and I was told they were not allowed to say that was considered, disrespectful even, and that we weren't going to have all that. And so I found a way that we worked through it, and my boys didn't lose it, but they understood when to say it and when not to say it. And it probably even strengthened them in their resolve to use it. But I want us to get past that and understand this is not a Southern nicety. That is the first best way to instill respect in a young child. Just imagine if children, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds children, were first taught to say yes, sir, and no, sir, and yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am to an adult. It does so much. It instills a respect for authority, which goes far beyond the family, that transcends to all of the adult relationships, and it gives them that understanding of respect. And it's not anything more than that, and it's not anything less than that, but that's what it is. It's respect. And if I could go on a crusade, that would be can we please get past this thing? It's not a Southern nicety. This is the best, easiest, first most important way to instill respect in children and that understanding for authority. One other caveat I just add to that too is to establish the Ruby Rule, we call it, as the rule of your home, which takes the golden rule to another level and even beyond treating others the way you want to be treated, but to respect others the way you want to be respected. And that's between husband and wife. That's between parents to children, children to parents, when respect is the kind of the ground level expectation. And nix disrespect, that should be nixed in the bud immediately. The role of I mean, when I was growing up, if mother said something and daddy saw my shoulder lift, I mean, you were called to the carpet, or you rolled those eyes. If there was any hint of disrespect, it was nixed. If we could do just that one element, what a difference it would make. And and beyond that, even the respect for others. What happens is when we start with that respect for authority, that makes it so easy for a child to understand the respect for God and to have respect for God and respect for God's word, which moves into respect for others. And that's where that wheel of respect gets put in place. And that's where a child gains then respect for themselves, which is what they ultimately need to complete that circle and become all God created them to be, because they'll be able to make the wise, right choices.
Mhm. Well, you can get Jill's book, Strongheart, and here it is. And you can see I have marked so many pages because I just want to continue reading it. It's just so great. It's just a wealth of information. I think that you would really enjoy this book. It's Cultivating Humility, Respect, and Resiliency in Your Child. And you can find out more about Jill on her website, mannersoftheheart.org. And Jill, what would you like to leave my audience with today?
If you really truly want to raise a strong heart, and my definition for a strong heart is a morally courageous child, grounded in truth and fortified with self respect, and morally courageous, that's a child who doesn't just know what they stand for, but that's the kid who, I'd like to say it this way, who will stand up while others sit down. A strong heart will speak up when others stay silent, and a strong heart will step in when everybody else is stepping back out. If that's truly what you want to accomplish, then ground your children in God's word and set the Ruby Rule as the foundation of your home to respect others the way you want to be respected. And I believe this next generation might turn us back around.
What if embracing these values in your family could change how your child faces life's challenges? Thanks for joining in. If you like this interview, I'd like to hear from you. And please like and subscribe for more Christ-centered conversations. And check out our website, thecallwithnancysabato.com, and find out more about our previous guests. Until next time, all glory and honor to King Jesus.